This content is AI generated for informational purposes only and should not be directly used for clinical decision-making.
Hello and welcome back to the Neurosurgery Hub podcast. I'm Dr. Eris, Senior Attending Neurosurgeon.
And I'm Dr. Alara, Research Fellow. Today we're looking at a fascinating new study from the Child's Nervous System Journal, published in 2026, titled The Emerging Role of Intraoperative Nanopore Sequencing on the Neurosurgical Strategy in Pediatric Embryonal Brain Tumors.
This is a timely topic, Ilara. For those of us in the OR, embryonal tumors, medulloblastoma, ATRT, and ETMR have always presented a unique challenge. We've traditionally relied on preoperative imaging and intraoperative frozen section pathology to guide our hands. But as this paper points out, there is substantial radiological overlap between these entities.
Exactly, Dr. Eris. The authors highlight that while preoperative MRI is our standard, the radiological distinction between medulloblastoma, atypical teratoid rhabdoid tumor, ATRT, and embryonal tumor with multi-layered rosettes, ETMR, is not always feasible. And frozen sections, they often just give us a broad category like embryonal tumor, which doesn't help much when we're trying to decide just how radical to be.
That's the crux of the problem. We're constantly trying to strike a balance between the oncological need for radical resection and a maximal safe resection to avoid neurological morbidity. The paper mentions that the definition of a safe resection is inherently variable. It depends on the surgeon's experience, the institution, and even implicit value judgments regarding long-term disability.
Right, and the paper argues that while tools like intraoperative ultrasound, neuronavigation, and IO-MRI tell us where we are operating, they don't tell us what biological entity we are actually resecting. This information gap is what intraoperative nanopore sequencing aims to bridge.
So walk us through the technology as the paper describes it. How does a research fellow explain this to a resident who's currently scrubbing in?
It's quite revolutionary. We're talking about real-time molecular methylation-based diagnostics. These sequencing platforms generate low-coverage methylation and copy number profiles. The incredible part is the timeline. It happens within 30 to 90 minutes. This enables AI-assisted tumor classification while the surgical planning is still adaptable.
30 to 90 minutes. That means by the time I've finished the approach and debulked a core of the tumor, I could have a molecular diagnosis before I start working on the interface with the brainstem or the cranial nerves.
Precisely. The paper notes that this allows the surgeon to decide the optimal strategy for the final phase of the surgery. They found that early implementation studies suggest this real-time molecular diagnosis alters surgical strategies in approximately 10 to 20% of cases.
That's a significant percentage. Let's dive into why that matters for specific tumors. The paper spends a lot of time on medulloblastoma subgroups.
Yes, and this is where it gets highly specific for neurosurgeons. We know that medulloblastoma isn't one disease. It's WNT, SHH, Group 3, and Group 4. The authors point out that retrospective analyses suggest the survival impact of gross total resection, GTR, differs between these subgroups.
Right. If I know I'm looking at a WNT subgroup medulloblastoma, which generally has an excellent prognosis, I might weigh the risks of radicality differently than if I'm looking at a high-risk Group 3 tumor. The paper states that surgical strategy can only be meaningfully optimized when biological tumor identity is known at the time of decision-making.
It also highlights the aggressive biology of ATRT and ETMR. These are entities where real-time confirmation of that biology might support a more informed decision regarding the extent of resection. If the intraoperative nanopore sequencing confirms an ETMR, the surgeon knows they are dealing with a highly aggressive tumor where the oncological relevance of the extent of resection is paramount.
It shifts the conversation from can I take this out to should I take this out given the biology. The authors mentioned that over the past decades, pediatric neurosurgery has become safer due to IONM and neuronavigation, but we've reached a plateau because we lacked the what.
I found the section on surgical decision dynamics particularly interesting. It's not just about the technology, it's about workflow implementation. You need a tight integration between the surgical team and neuropathology. The paper describes this as a workflow redesign. It's not just sending a sample to the lab and waiting, it's an active intraoperative collaboration.
And it addresses the limitations of the term maximal safe resection. The authors call it intuitively appealing, yet inherently variable. By having the molecular data, we can move away from generalized recommendations and towards prospective and individualized strategies.
They also point out a gap in current literature. Many studies focus on radiographic or survival endpoints, but patient-reported outcome measures are frequently absent. This technology might allow us to study the impact of resection radicality on survival and functional outcomes specifically for each molecular subgroup.
It's the difference between anatomical orientation and biological orientation. I can use my IOUS to see where the tumor ends, but the nanopore sequencing tells me if that last millimeter of tumor is worth the risk of a cranial nerve deficit.
Exactly. And for the residents listening, the paper emphasizes that this is still an emerging role. While it's feasible and shows high diagnostic accuracy, we still need to define the long-term impact on surgical morbidity and overall outcomes.
It's a shift in the philosophy of the operating room. We are no longer just mechanics removing a mass. We are acting on real-time genomic data. What were the key priorities for the future that the authors outlined?
They mentioned three main priorities. First, defining the impact of this technology on surgical morbidity. Second, looking at how it affects the actual extent of resection achieved. And finally, the long-term survival outcomes. They want to see if this biology-specific impact of resection actually leads to better quality of life.
It's about achieving survival with an acceptable quality of life, as they put it. That is the preferred outcome.
One thing that struck me in the text was the mention of copy number profiles. It's not just the name of the tumor, but the genomic landscape, like mic amplification, that could be available to us mid-surgery. That's a level of detail frozen sections could never provide.
And that's crucial for Group 3 medulloblastomas. If you see mic amplification, you know you're in for a fight.
So, Dr. Aris, as a senior attending, if I tell you 45 minutes into a case that the nanopore sequencing just confirmed an SHH medulloblastoma versus an ATRT, how does that change your approach to the cerebellar peduncle?
If it's ATRT, I know the prognosis is often dismal and the tumor is incredibly infiltrative. I might be more aggressive to achieve GTR because we know how much the extent of resection matters there. But if it's a subgroup where the benefit of GTR over near total resection is marginal and that peduncle is looking fragile, I might stop. This technology gives us the biological permission to be either more aggressive or more conservative.
It's about better informed decisions. The authors really stress that this technology supports the neurosurgeon with additional biological information during intraoperative decisions.
It's a fascinating time to be in the field. This paper from the Princess Máxima Center and Erasmus MC really sets the stage for the next decade of pediatric neuro-oncology.
Definitely. It moves us from the era of one-size-fits-all surgery to truly precision neurosurgery.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thank you, Dr. Ilara, for bringing this study to our attention.
My pleasure. It's definitely a paper every resident should have on their reading list.
To our listeners, remember, know your anatomy, but increasingly know your biology. We'll see you next time on the Neurosurgery Hub podcast.
Goodbye, everyone.